one of the reasons why something like Furnished Finder is great is because you do find, as we've kind of already talked about, a lot of working professionals who not only can afford living in a nice place, but will take care of it and are super respectful. And there is some vetting process that goes on there, but I do think for the most part, quality of tenants is very high. And so that's an important piece for people who might be hesitant or thinking about doing it.
Welcome to the Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the leader and largest online marketplace for midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
If you've ever considered renting out a room in your home, stay tuned. Edward Kusell will show us just how simple and rewarding it can be. With almost 2 years of consistent room rental bookings through Furnished Finder and 8 5-star reviews, Edward has built a reliable income stream hosting traveling professionals, interns, and individuals relocating to Seattle. In this episode, Edward breaks down his approach and why room rentals can be a smart entry point into real estate investing. Edward, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, let's have a fun conversation about room rentals, and why not start with what inspired you to start renting out a room in your home on Furnished Finder?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the main inspirations was just to get another income stream. And I have this beautiful home. So I figured that would be a good way to do it. I would say the slightly deeper story is I had been working at Amazon in Seattle for a few years and wanted to set off on a different path for myself and get back into education. So I now run my own tutoring business and work as a adjunct faculty member at the local university. But that also meant I had to supplement my income in different ways. And the home was kind of an obvious choice. So Furnished Finder was one of the first things I discovered in that process.
Yeah, academics is actually one of our growing categories on Furnish Finder. You know, we were founded with travel nurses in mind, but we've grown to so much more. And corporate travel, business travel, is actually about 35% of our current tenant type. So lots of fantastic guests on Furnish Finder. So you've hosted everyone from interns to traveling professionals. What kind of tenants have stayed in your home, and how long do they typically stay?
Yeah. So just to your point, I've had a variety of tenants. I have had traveling nurses. So one of them was an MRI tech who worked at the local hospital, and I do live close to Kaiser, so that helps as well. But I've also had a lot of tech people, not surprisingly, being in Seattle. So huge range. I've had people as young as 23. So actually, my current tenant who will be moving out soon, he's an intern at Microsoft. And then I had somebody come who was probably in their say late 50s, had a family. Every night he was on the phone with his kids and his wife, who's super cute. And he was coming here to work at Amazon and just look for a home to stay in to move into. So that kind of gives you a general sense in terms of you have some people are interns or working here temporarily, and some people are looking to move more permanently, let's say to Seattle. So I accommodate both those. And as far as time, I think the average has been, it's very common to see about 2 to 4 months, I think is quite common. But I have had a couple that have stayed longer, and I had one that stayed here for about 8 or 9 months. And so that can come up, and that's great too, because it's a little bit less work on the, transition and turnover. But so it's quite a range, but I would say the most common is around 3 months.
And Edward, why, in your opinion, are room rentals such an underrated strategy for investors and homeowners who have the extra space or maybe who it's not their primary residence even?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, so I'm not like in the business per se that I'm working with this every day, and I don't work in real estate outside of this. So underrated or not, I don't know that personally, but I think I can see, I guess maybe one of the reasons why people, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but maybe one of the reasons why people don't get into it is just my case is unique in that I live in the home and I have 2 stories. And so while there are some shared spaces like the kitchen and dining room, things like that, I think some people might be just apprehensive about renting out their room and consistently renting it out to someone who is a stranger, right? So I could see why I don't have that apprehension, and I really like it, and I've had great experiences with roommates. So maybe one thing is just knowing that there are good people out there, I guess, that can live in your home. I also think one of the reasons why something like Furnished Finder is great is because you do find, as we've kind of already talked about, a lot of working professionals who not only can afford living in a nice place, but will take care of it and are super respectful. And there is some vetting process that goes on there, but I do think for the most part, quality of tenants is very high. And so that's an important piece for people who might be hesitant or thinking about doing it. And so, there's the obvious options, I guess, like Airbnb for short-term rental. And so kind of this speaks a little bit to the underrated point, but I think that Airbnb is really, there's a lot more hidden things going on there, let's say, even though I think that's great for what it is. And I think with this, you're getting that longer term tenant and don't have to worry about as much of that. You have a lot more autonomy in running it yourself, which I really appreciate. So that could be another benefit of doing it, but it's a little more under the radar. Obviously, Airbnb is like a household name at this point. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yep, that was fantastic. Your home is actually a 1920s craftsman home in a very sought after area of Seattle. So, what about the layout makes it so great for room rentals? And, are there anything that someone needs to be aware of if they have an older home that they're renting out furnished?
As you pointed out, it's in a great location. It's in a neighborhood called Capitol Hill, which is very central to Seattle. And even though I've only had, I think, one traveling nurse of all the people, it is close to a lot of hospitals and medical centers. So for at least that explicit purpose, it's great. And so location is awesome. As far as the layout goes, it is 2 stories. And so I kind of stay in the bottom area, and there's both a bedroom and bathroom in both each story. So there's total privacy for myself and for the tenant. So that does help a lot. And then I've installed a door that separates and is kind of like a thicker soundproof kind of door, but just helps a little bit dampen the sound for both of us. So that those things do help. Maintenance is important. It is a well taken care of old home, so there isn't any maintenance beyond what would be expected, I guess, for that type of home. And the only thing I'd say about that with regards that I think is relevant to specifically Furnished Finder and renting out is I'm very, very on top of any kind of maintenance or requests that come up. And I do think it helps in my case, since I live in the home, I'm aware of what's going on. I take care of it and it's immediate service. I don't think of it as customer service because I just live here, but yeah, so that does help in terms of kind of that tenant relationship. And also it kind of helps me because if something goes wrong, I'm not really using that space much otherwise. So if something's going wrong and the bathroom's clogged up or something, then it's like I can go fix that right away. So that does help as well.
Well, Edward, I actually like that you're not a real estate investor per se, and you're not, you don't do this full time because that's how I think the majority of the landlords on Furnished Finder are, right? And but there's just so much opportunity for a little bit of extra income, like you said, or to fill those spaces, provide housing for people who are in the area to serve the community. So I think, not only is that not uncommon at all, but it's just a great use of that extra space and to try to help pad that income, get a little bit of the supplemental cash flow, like you're saying. So, what would you tell someone if they're considering doing a room rental? What do you think someone should consider before they're listing their home, or what kind of expectations do they have?
Well, I think there is a big spread in terms of the roommate experience. And so it does help if you are open to that. And at the same time, you also have some control of that. And what I mean by that is just something very simple, like how social someone is versus let's say, extroverted versus introverted. So I've had roommates, for example, that just stay in their room the whole time and super respectful still, and they do their thing. And so I think just kind of being able to balance as the owner somebody who's kind of wanting to more be on their own versus somebody who kind of comes out and be social. It does help a lot if you're open to both those experiences. I don't think about this because I'm kind of used to like, I mostly work at home, but I do go out quite a bit more in the evenings. And then sometimes I do have to work in person during the day. So I have a pretty varied schedule, but I am home quite a bit. So I think just something to think about would be what are your schedules and routines, right? That may seem obvious, but I do think it's super important to understand what are your routines, what are your expectations around when you want privacy or not, or full privacy or not, and then talk about those things with whoever's coming to your home. like I said, I've had pretty much everything. I've had people who are there 5 days a week working remotely. There's a big tech culture here, I think, as I mentioned before. So that happens a lot. But I also have people who are out almost every day and working in person. And all of those have worked, but they are different experiences. So if somebody's in the home all the time and you're going to be in the home, then you probably need to be open to kind of bumping into them more and having those kind of conversations on a regular basis, just, little interactions throughout the day. So I would just kind of know for yourself what is important to you in terms of privacy, socializing, how much you're going to see your roommate, and what your schedule is.
You have a great listing on Furnished Finder, so I'd love to dive deeper into, some of those room rental tips. And first off, you have, prices, of course, vary on Furnished Finder because not every state, city, or area are created equal. So keep that in mind. We do have a pricing worksheet available. That is a great tool for helping you decide how you should price your room rental or your entire space. But Edward, you price your room rental right around $2,050. That may fluctuate some throughout the year. How has the room rental business been financially a great opportunity for you that helps not only meet new people, you've made quite a few new friends, but how does this help with your day-to-day life?
So I guess, I mean, obviously getting some income is super helpful for paying whether you have a mortgage or don't have a mortgage or just need, money for any reason to live your life. So certainly it's super helpful. And I guess one thing that's relevant to this is kind of where is the price point of my place, say, relative to prices in Seattle of renting. And so I think that was a big decision point and something I experimented with at the beginning. So I actually remember I started out even higher than that at one point and did get a couple bites, but those didn't really work out, but I wasn't getting as many bites as I thought. And admittedly, that was probably a little high price. I ended up a little lower than I'm currently at one point, and that was working but not much lower. And then I kind of slowly moved the price up little by little. And it's still below market in terms of, say, your own one bedroom, one bath place of maybe like, say, 700 to 900 square feet in this neighborhood or in similar neighborhoods in Seattle. So, I mean, for people listening out there who are not in Seattle or San Francisco or New York, you probably think it's exorbitant. And it is. Seattle's quite expensive. So that does allow me to charge a relatively high price point. It's probably important to note that all utilities, internet, et cetera, and so on are all included in that price. I personally like that because it's just less thinking, and I don't want to manage collecting payments for utilities or the internet or like itemize it. So that just makes things easier for me administratively. And then I do put in my lease. I kind of have like a boilerplate lease that's just from the state of Washington, but then I have a page where I've written out my specific criteria and then we agree upon those beforehand and they read them as well. And I send this all and I'm super transparent with them. But when in there, I put basically a thing that says like, if for whatever reason the use of electricity goes beyond a certain amount, then I can charge more. So it just protects me in the case of, some sort of crazy water use or something like that. But that has never come up. And again, I live in the home, so I have tons of control over that. But yeah, so in terms of price point, I'm slightly below market for nice one bedroom apartments in the neighborhood. And so I think that makes it attractive. And so the other thing about the price point is I think actually keeping it at or near the market rate helps you attract the right type of person. So if I were kind of to, let's say, charge 1,200 a month, which would be well under market, and that would be like a very, very small studio on Cap Hill, or if you're getting a really good deal or grandfathered into a cheap price, you're probably going to also attract people who are either struggling to afford that, which is fine, that's just the place they're at, or maybe they're like in college or other things. And it just makes it harder for me to find the types of tenants I'm looking for who I know will take care of my home necessarily or have more assurance of that. And so I think charging a price point also filters out people who are more serious about it. And I did notice that when I had a lower price point, there was a lot more churn in terms of the process because there was a lot more people checking out, say, 10, 15 places at once, and they weren't so convinced of mine. And maybe they're just looking for a deal which is okay, as opposed to a really nice home to live in. So I want to attract people who are looking for a really nice place to live where I'm going to treat them well and they're going to treat the space well. And so there's kind of like a mutual understanding. And price is one of many data points you can use to filter out the right type of person.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that on Furnished Finder, you're in control of your pricing, right? You can adjust it as much as you want, which can be really advantageous, especially as you learn more about the tenant types that you're attracting or, different travelers that might be interested in your space. It can be really insightful and you can play with that. And what I really like is I never have to think about, okay, if I'm charging $2,000, then I take out booking fees, commissions, the traveler's paying this. Okay, I'm going to net 1,600. I'm charging $2,000. I'm going to get $2,000. It's just so much more simple. And I love your note about not forgetting utilities and internet. That is absolutely expected. Sometimes I think, or I wonder when I see properties that are really priced on the low end, if they're remembering to include those costs. So our pricing worksheet, for everybody who's interested, is on our resources page, of furnishedfinder.com, and that will help you walk through all of those and make sure you're not forgetting anything like, insurance or taxes or all that, because it's easy to forget, but you want to make sure that you have all of those. So I think that's you've had a really smart approach to pricing, especially because it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming to people. So I like how you've taken control of that. Now let's talk about how you take control about which tenants move in. I would guess that in a hot market like Seattle, like you said, lots of tech, lots of interns, lots of people coming and going to be with those big companies for a while they're doing some sort of contract or program. Um, let's say you have an interest and it all looks great. Tell us about your tenant screening process.
I do think I've lucked out. And 2 years is definitely a significant amount of time, but not like that significant for me to have a huge data pool on this. But I do think so. There's a couple things. I don't get, say, like 10 or 20 inquiries coming in all the time. And since I'm booking out for 3 months or even more, I'm blocking out the calendar. And you will get a couple that come in early, say 2, 3 months even before the date they want to move, who are anxious to figure out their living situation, which is totally understandable. And with those folks, I'll take any call if they seem reasonable. If somebody messages me, and basically the way I guess to go through that, and I'm going to be perhaps a little bit all over the place here, but somebody will message me assuming they seem reasonable, which I haven't had anybody who's rude or obnoxious or anything like that, but I would take their call. I would call them, tell them about the situation when it's available, try to understand a little bit about them and what their motivation is. And I can talk more about that specific screening process in a second. And then if it's really early, I just tell them, hey, I don't know yet what's going to happen. As it gets closer, we can talk more. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. More people will start to reach out to you within even 1 week, but I would say 2, 3 weeks before is when kind of like the peak time will be. And I usually get like 3 to 5 people total. So I just want to have a more cross section of that. It's really hard for me to lock something in that far in advance. So I usually don't lock something in and haven't that early, but it's also on the tenant as well, meaning usually those tenants who are so early are checking out many, many options. So they're not ready to commit either. So even on their end, I would say their lack of commitment makes me hesitant as well because they may change within that time. Whereas if I get somebody, say, 3 weeks before, they're usually like, hey, I really know what I need. I really know what I want, what location I'm in. And so it just makes the whole process quicker. And that's one of my first things I'm assessing for is just how serious is this person about this spot? And I can tell part of that just based on the fact that they're super responsive. They're reaching out and texting me. I usually will give them my number once they've reached out on Furnished Finder. And then while do have some people that come in from out of town and so they can't come physically view the place, if they're in town or for any reason, then I do have them come look at the place because I want them to see it. I want them to understand where they're going to live. And if they can't do that, then I do a video call. So that way they can see and we get a sense of each other. So that kind of helps with that. And that gives a sense of a timeline and how many people are usually inquiring about the place. As far as my actual screening process, so there's kind of let's break it down, I guess, into informal and formal. So the informal process is everything I was just talking about, kind of the call, getting to know them, understanding what they do for a living, getting a general sense of who they are and their ability to pay and kind of how they're going to treat the place. And I kind of am betting that just based off personality. And I think, you have to, I guess, know yourself and know what you're comfortable with. And if you're a good judge of character in terms of people, again, I've had really amazing across the board tenants who are all really nice with varying personalities. And then the more formal part is once you move forward, sharing the lease, getting some background information, preferably a background check from the person and a couple referrals so you can call and just make sure the person is who they say they are. And so I think all those steps are important and you don't sign anything or take any money or deposits until you've gone through those processes. And I also share that with my tenants as well. So I share my LinkedIn, I share a contact if they did want to reach out to somebody, my background check. So it's just full transparency across the board before, anything is set in stone.
One thing that I want you all to remember is that with Furnish Finder, we set you up for success so that when you get that yes on Furnish Finder, you're not like, uh-oh, what do I do next? It's not just an instant book. I have a booking process. So we have all those tools for you that protects you, keeps it safe, and keeps you in control. You know who, as Edward's saying, you know who's going to be in your home because you can have conversations with them first. We've got the tenant screening. We've got leases and legal documents. We have rent payments. So everything you need for a successful stay is on Furnish Finder. So don't forget those tools. And one thing I'd love to hear from you in setting those expectations, Edward, is privacy and shared spaces. What do you set in your conversation and in your home, maybe through notes or house rules on what that privacy and shared space balance is?
Yeah, I think that's super important. And they have it, whether it's in the video call or they come in person, they, get to see the space as much as possible. I do say in the lease as the kind of separate notes that aren't part of the general Washington lease, that they have access to the bathroom, their bedroom, and office exclusively. I can't go in there without permission. So that's clear. I also state what the shared areas are so that it's clear up front, the kitchen, the dining room, the TV room, things like that. I'm also part of a very small but broader HOA. And even though we don't share walls in that traditional way, maybe an HOA or apartment complex would be, there is like an outdoor common area where we have a shared courtyard and there's a parking space. So I just make sure it's clear what the rules are around that for the HOA and their use of it. And so all those things are again transparent up front. And then also about my space. So for example, there's the washer dryer is in my kind of area in the downstairs. And so I let them know they're allowed to use that, but just, it's as simple as just, hey, knock, or if I'm not home, you're allowed to use it. So specifying, and that could change. Like I could say like, hey, you are not able to use that anytime unless I am home or explicitly during these times. I suppose if you wanted more structured around it, I'm pretty loose with that as long as they're just polite about coming to my space. So yeah, I think making those things as clear as possible in the lease and then also guest policy. So that's going to vary. Everybody's going to be different, but maybe they have a partner or a family member that wants to come by now and then. So just being super clear on that. I personally do a twice a week policy and then everything else in terms of like if you wanted to do a group dinner or host or something like that, I'm totally open to that. It doesn't come up super frequently, but we just talk about that. So some of those are more verbal agreements and vary from roommate to roommate. But I certainly think you should make absolutely explicit what are the private spaces, what are the shared spaces, have that in writing, make sure that's agreed upon up front, and any kind of general rules around quiet hours, whether that's for you personally or for based on some other like neighborhood criteria, things like that.
Well, Edward, I think it's so apparent that you've thought through all of these details, and I think that's a common theme here, right? Is that renting your room does not have to be scary, it doesn't have to be intimidating, it doesn't have to mean an invasion of privacy. It doesn't have to mean living with strangers. You can turn these people into, a great part of your life and great relationships, but the key is clarity, right? Setting boundaries, having a good tenant screening process, having a good lease, having a good listing, all of these things Furnish Finder is going to help facilitate. And I think that is just you're like the proof, right? That it really can work. I think what I'd really like to wrap up with today is how renting part of your room, part of your home has positively impacted your life? Like, what has it allowed you to do that might have been more difficult, whether it be financially or otherwise, that you wouldn't be able to do if you had not chosen this route?
The first and perhaps most obvious one is I'm super thankful for having more financial peace of mind. So, you know, I guess unless you're Bill Gates, which there is a Bill Gates in Seattle, I you know, it's nice to have something to be able to use the assets that you do have to support your just finances. So that's huge. And and I think, we've already mentioned this, but I do think Furnished Finder is particularly nice because of the longer durations, right? So it just makes that a little smoother. So I think that's a huge one. And then I think the cultural exchange, if you want to call it that, but it's like I lived abroad and I've worked in education or around education for a long time. And part of the reason I love that space is just because you get to work with people so much. And while a roommate relationship is very different than, say, like a student relationship or the types of people you might meet when you're abroad and traveling and the mindset you have, I do think sharing your home is a really beautiful way to get to know somebody and you just see so many different personalities and people who are invested in different professions. And I think I love that piece of it and getting to know people, even if it's just a little bit for the time that they're here. So I like to get to open up my home and have somebody come in and, feel comfortable in the space and do whatever they need to do here in Seattle. So I think that's really cool. And I think it is nice. This is not, I would say, my principal motivation, but I do think it's also nice. Seattle and any say city that is really expensive has a bit of a housing shortage, right? So it is nice to also be able to use my space to increase the amount of housing that's available. And so I think those are three things that come to mind. But yeah, it's just overall a very positive experience. It helps out with your finances. It's a great way to meet people and yeah, and just open up your home to a new experience.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode. And quick reminder that Furnish Finder has over 300,000 listings available in all 50 states. If you wanted to travel to Hawaii or Maine, there are properties available there, and 22% of Furnish Finder's inventory is room rentals. So whether you choose to rent by the room or entire spaces, we make it straightforward, simple for you. You can connect. You're in control. So if you have any questions, please put it in the show notes. We'd be happy to address those either in a response or in a future episode. So if you'd like to connect with Edward, a reminder, his listing will be in the show notes. And another fantastic episode of the Landlord Diaries. Edward, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you again next time.